So, good morning. I am most honored to welcome all of you and to thank everyone present here, church leaders, scholars, colleagues, journalists, friends. This panel will explore the document on fraternity for world peace and living together that signed on February 4th, 2019 by Pope Francis and by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad Al-Tayeb. The reach of the text of the important document and the joint signature took everyone by surprise. The document represents the culmination of an extensive dialogue between Pope Francis and the Grand Imam, but also a new beginning, a joint invitation by both religious leaders for others around the world to participate in and deepen the dialogue with their own contribution. Critical for our gathering today, the document plays a central role in Fratelli Tutti. In the encyclical, the Pope writes, "I have felt particularly encouraged by the Grand Imam Ahmad Al-Tayeb, with whom I meet in Abu Dhabi, where we declared that God has created all human beings equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and has called them to live together as brothers and sisters. This is, of course, only the most recent peaceful encounter between the Catholic Church and Islam. In Fratelli Tutti, the Pope recalls the visit of Francis of Assisi to Sultan Malik al-Kamil in Egypt at the time of Crusades. Francis, remind the Pope, did not wage a war of words aimed at imposing doctrines. He simply spread the love of God. During his visit to the Sultan, Francis was able to free himself of the desire to wield power over others. Today, we are here to walk the path traced by Francesco d'Assisi and Sultan al-Kamil, by Pope Francis and Grand Imam. And before starting, please let me thank Father Antonio Spadaro for our collaboration and Tom Banshoff. You are the best boss in the world. Thank you so much. So, it is a great honor and a great pleasure to introduce our first guest, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Faisal Al-Remeti. He is the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Elders, boasts a glittering background as a university professor, novelist, and academic interpreter who holds a PhD in business administration from the United Arab Emirates University on Zaka marketing. He has held various senior management positions in media, policy implementation, project management, information system, and research during his nearly 20-year career. He was awarded by Al-Owais Cultural Award and the Medal of Science and Art of the First Order in Egypt. So, thank you for accepting our invitation, and please, the podium is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. I was going to deliver this speech to ask you to vote whether I have to deliver this speech in English or Arabic, but unfortunately the decision was made to deliver it in Arabic. So you will have a copy. It's in English, and please if you wish to follow with me. أصحاب الفضيلة والغبطة والسعادة، السادة الحضور، إن منطلقات العقل الإسلامي الجمعي محمولة على جناحين أتاح له أن ينطلق في فضاءات هائلة من المعرفة بالآخر. أول هذين الجناحين هو التعارف، وثانيها هو التعاون على البر والتقوى. وتعد هذه منهجية صلبة للانطلاق الحضاري الذي يقوم على تعارف لا محدود يتجاوز مستويات الجهل ويتخطى حواجز التفرقة، ويجعل من اللقاءات التي تجمعنا فرصة لنفتح أبواب التعارف، لنسأل بعضنا عن هويتنا الثقافية، عن عاداتنا وعن تقاليدنا، وعن طريقة تبادلنا لكلمات الحب والاحترام، حتى عن الطعام على موائدنا وما يقدم عليها. هذا هو التعارف المولد للتعاون. وعلى البر والتقوى، وهما مصطلحان إسلاميان يحثان على فعل الخير واجتناب الشر، وبهذا فالتعاون واجب في نفع الإنسان وخدمته وصون كرامته. وعلى هذه المنهجية أيضا قامت العلاقات بين الإسلام والمسيحية، وهي علاقة قديمة متجددة تمتد بجذورها إلى عهد النبوة، حيث حاور نبي الإسلام محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم مسيحي نجران، وتواصل الحوار لعدة أيام، وتعددت أطرافه وقضاياه، وتواصلت أطراف الحوار في نهايته إلى عقد احتوى على مبادئ مذهلة للمواطنة والعيش المشترك بين أتباع الديانتين. وتحولت هذه المبادئ إلى ممارسات وتاريخ طويل من التعايش يؤكد عليه التنوع والثراء الديني والثقافي الكبير الذي يعيشه العالم الإسلامي، ويثبته عدد المؤسسات الدينية المسيحية التي نشأت وتكونت ونمت في ظل هذه الحاضنة الاجتماعية. وكانت هذه المنهجية من التعارف حاضرا أيضا على صعيد العلاقات بين الشرق والغرب، فالتاريخ يثبت أن هذه العلاقات لم تكن عدائية على الدوام كما يتخيل البعض، بل لقد كانت مزدحمة بأشكال مختلفة من التفاعل الإيجابي بين الجانبين. فلقد شهدت العلاقات تبادلا علميا ومعرفيا وثقافيا وفنيا، وإن آثار التمازج بين الحضارتين الشرقية والغربية واضحة في كثير من معالم الحضارتين، إلى حد يستحيل فيه فصل إحداهما عن الأخرى. وامتدت تلك العلاقات أيضا على المستوى الديني، وجميعا يتذكر بالكثير من الإعجاب الحوار بين السلطان الكامل والقديس فرانسيس الأسيزي، والذي تم في خضم صراع عسكري بين الشرق والغرب، ليؤكد لنا أن هناك دائما فرصة لتحقيق السلام، حتى في وسط ساحات الصراعات وفي أوج ارتفاع أصوات الكراهية يمكننا أن نعلي أصوات الحب. وبين ثنايا تلك العلاقة الإنسانية بين الكامل والأسيزي ولدت علاقة أخوية بين فضيلة الإمام الطيب شيخ الأزهر الشريف رئيس مجلس حكماء المسلمين وبين قداسة البابا فرانسيس، وفي ظروف تتشابه في كثير من جوانبها مع ما عاشه سلفهما الكامل والأسيزي، ومن حيث انتشار الحروب وتصاعد خطابات العنف والتمييز. ولقد ألهم الله عز وجل لفضيلة الإمام وقداسة البابا العزيمة والحكمة، وأوجد فيهما الرغبة الصادقة لإطلاق وثيقة الأخوة الإنسانية التي مثلت نقطة مفصلية في تاريخ العلاقات الإسلامية المسيحية، بل والعلاقات الإنسانية على وجه العموم. ثم جاء رسالة قداسة البابا كلنا أخوة لتحمل رؤية تطبيقية لمفهوم الأخوة الإنسانية، فقد شخص من خلالها الواقع الإنساني تشخيصا دقيقا من زوايا وأبعاد متعددة لم يتم التطرق إليها من قبل، بهذا التصور الإنساني ليصل بالقارئ في النهاية إلى تصور متكامل عن مفهوم الأخوة وآليات تحقيقها. فقد تطرق قداسة البابا إلى خطر العولمة التي تعزز هوية الأقوياء وتستغل الصراعات المحلية، ثم هو ينبهنا إلى واحد من أخطر الممارسات الجائرة، وهي ما أسماه بالاستعباد، وعدد له صورا مختلفة من أبشعها إقصاء فئات معينة أو التضحية بهم مثل كبار السن وذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة والفقراء، وبين كيف أن هذا الاستعباد تجلى بوضوح خلال أزمة كورونا. بعد ذلك أكد البابا في رسالته على نقطة في غاية الأهمية والشجاعة، وهي ضرورة الربط بين الحرية وبين تنمية الوعي والأخوة الإنسانية، فالحرية بدون تربية على الأخوة والحوار تتحول إلى انعزالية، كما عالج قداسته قضية الهجرة بقلبه وفكره، فما كان منه إلا أن ينحاز لآلام اللاجئين ومعاناتهم الإنسانية، ورفض إغلاق الحدود في وجه من تقطعت بهم السبل، وطالب بتوفير سبل العيش الكريم لهم، مما لا شك فيه أن الأحداث والأزمات المتتالية والتي لا تكاد تنقطع تؤكد حاجتنا إلى الأخوة الإنسانية. لذلك فإننا في مجلس حكماء المسلمين برئاسة فضيلة الإمام الأكبر الدكتور أحمد الطيب حفظه الله تبنينا العديد من البرامج الهادفة لرفع الوعي بأهمية الأخوة الإنسانية، وقد بدأنا بمخاطبة الإعلام ومد جسور التعاون مع المؤسسات من خلال عقدنا للتجمع الإعلامي العربي وإطلاق مدونة 20 للعمل الإعلامي من أجل الأخوة الإنسانية، ثم عقد مؤتمر إعلاميون ضد الكراهية الذي دعا لتشكيل ائتلاف إعلامي عربي يهدف لتعزيز قيم الأخوة الإنسانية. كما أننا نعتزم في الأيام القادمة على إطلاق المزيد من المشاريع من خلال اللجنة العليا للأخوة الإنسانية التي أشرف بعضويتها إلى جانب العديد من الزملاء من مختلف الثقافات والأديان، بهدف تحقيق مبادئ وثيقة الأخوة الإنسانية التي نؤمن أنها السبيل الوحيد لتحقيق السلام لكل البشر دون استثناء فردا واحدا. وكما قال قداسته في رسالته العظيمة: طالما أن نظامنا يولد ضحية واحدة ولا يوجد سوى شخص واحد مستعبد، لن نتمكن من الاحتفال بالأخوة الشاملة. شكرا لكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I'd like to introduce my guest. Catherine Marshall is a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. She leads the center's work on religion and global development and a professor of the practice of development, conflict, and religion in the World School of Foreign Service. She helped to create and now serves as the executive director of the World Faith Development Dialogue. Catherine Marshall worked at the World Bank from 1971 to 2006, has nearly 4 decades of experience on a wide range of development issues in Africa, Latin America, East Asia, and the Middle East, particularly those facing the world's poorest countries. She led the World Bank's Faith and Ethics Initiative between 2000 and 2006. So welcome, Catherine. And Diego Sarriò Cucarella is a member of the Society of Missionaries of Africa. He has worked in Sudan, Algeria, Egypt, and Tunisia, where he directed the Bibliothèque des Sciences de Religion at Tunisia, and was part of the group de recherche islamo-chrétienne. He currently lectures at PISAI, where he also is the president. He also teaches at the Pontifical Biblical Institute and at Pontifical Lateran University in Rome. He is an honorary fellow of Australian Catholic University and consultor for the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. His research and publications focus on the intellectual history of Muslim-Christian relations and the continuing reciprocal theological constructions that this history has bequeathed to Christian and Muslim today. So thank you for coming. Thank you so much. And now to start our conversation, I would like to ask you the same question that was the focus of the talk of Dr. Al-Remiti. That is, how did or is doing the significance of Fratelli Tutti and the Declaration of Human Fraternity change the Catholic-Muslim relations and the interfaith understanding? Please, maybe Catherine, can you start?
Well, you posed a very large question, and I think that with this enormity, I find it useful to try to break down some of the different dimensions. And so there are at least 4 areas where we can see challenges and new ways of looking at things that have existed for a long time, that overlap, and that also have been aggravated and reshaped by the COVID emergencies. So I think the first issues, as I see them, are around active conflict. And we have quite fragmentary evidence, but it appears that conflicts in the world have increased. And there's also data that suggests that the religious dimensions of conflicts, which are always complicated, have increased. In other words, that the religious dimension of conflicts in a post-COVID world is important. And we have the Horn of Africa, which is on fire at this point, Nigeria, areas of the subcontinent and Africa. So the question of the peacemakers, the peace builders, and the ways in which Christian and religious, Catholic and Muslim communities can work together to try to address these conflicts is very important. I think the second are the broader tensions within world affairs that are part of the polarization in the world that we're seeing, perhaps most acutely around the issues of refugees and migrants, which is upsetting societies. And what is ominous is clearly that we're just seeing the beginning, where we don't even have a definition of climate refugees at this point. But here, I think the issue which is coming for our discussion of education is important. Addressing the hostilities that exist among communities. And in some of the surveys of different education systems, it is surprising how few examples there are of effective interreligious educational programs that are linked to civic values. So, but this education challenge for the rest, for most of the world is clearly very critical. The third dimension is the inequality, which I think is baked into the analysis in the documents that we're looking at. But it is one that's often not discussed as it should be. And I'm going to draw one piece of experience from my many years, I hate to say it, it's almost 5 decades, of working on development issues, that a focus only on the very poor and on the most marginalized does not resonate politically. And I miss in some of the discussion a focus on the middle class and on the emerging middle classes and the understanding of normal life. Because if a politician speaks only of the very poor, they lose their audience. So I think that's, and then the fourth dimension, which I think is the concern that I've been working on for the past 20 years, is what we call faith at the table. And I'm going to repeat something I've said many times, which is that if you're not at the table, you end up on the menu. And this question of finding meaningful ways that this religious voice, this religious wisdom, this religious experience is part of the global agendas, whether it's at the UN or the G20 or the G7 or whatever, is a continuing challenge that calls on us to cross a different boundary, which is the boundary between the language and the personalities and the worldviews and approaches that drive the Sustainable Development Goals, that drive the discussions that are part of the G20 and the COP26, that bring the religious dimensions in ways that are persuasive but also deeply substantive. So I think that we have these four dimensions: the conflict problem, the social tensions, which have been aggravated by COVID with Islamophobia, religious freedom violations, tensions between governments and communities, the inequality issue, which is a central issue of our time but too little discussed, and the question of faith and secular relationships and communication.
Well, thank you so much. So a very complex area of interest to solve and to understand the influence of, or the possible influence of these documents in the real life.
Right.
So thank you. And Diego, what do you mean about?
Thank you, Deborah, for your kind words of presentation earlier. And let me begin by saying that I'm very honored to have been given this chance to be here today, part of this panel. Now, coming back to your question, I see the significance of the document on human fraternity to lie in the fact that it provides Christian-Muslim dialogue with both a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, and at the same time, a sense of urgency. And let me explain what I mean. Regarding the first aspect, the sense of direction, the sense of purpose, for me it is clear that the document on human fraternity is fundamentally an invitation to rediscover and reappropriate, and I insist on these two words because it has already been said yesterday by Cardinal Ayuso, this is not, and also today by Cardinal Tagle, this is not new doctrine. So it's an invitation to rediscover and reappropriate the innate vocation of the human family to fraternity, or put it in different words, to rediscover and reappropriate the universal dimension of fraternity. And I think the two signatories of the document, Pope Francis and the Grand Imam Ahmed Al-Tayeb, openly invite Christians and Muslims today to recognize that above and beyond our particular religious belonging, we also belong to a global community, which is the human family. And this affirmation is based on the simple yet deep religious theological truth that is repeated 3 times in the document, at the beginning of the introduction, at the beginning of the document itself, and at the end of the document, the simple yet deep theological truth that we have all been created equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and called to live as brothers and sisters. So that there is already in our creation, that's what I said, it's an innate vocation to live as brothers and sisters, to universal fraternity. And it is from this basic, most important, essential affirmation that we find in the document that the rest of it derives. And in that sense, I said that this document clearly provides a sense of purpose and direction to Christian-Muslim initiatives today, in the sense that any initiative, Christian-Muslim dialogical initiative, will find its reason and also its credibility insofar it promotes and advances universal human fraternity. And if it does not, then it is a waste of time. But it's a waste of time at a moment when there is no time to waste, and this is my second point. which is also the sense of urgency that I see coming out not only from the document on human fraternity, but also from Fratelli Tutti. And for this, I think it's best illustrated by an image that Pope Francis himself used the 4th of February 2019 in a speech he delivered to a gathering of interreligious gathering, the very same day when the document was signed. And in this speech, the Pope begins by calling attention to the logo that was chosen for his journey to the United Arab Emirates, which was, if you remember, a dove and an olive branch. And of course, this recalls immediately the story of Noah in the book of Genesis. And then the Pope says, well, just as God asked Noah to enter the ark along with his family to assure the survival of humanity after the impending disaster and destruction, in the same way, God is calling us today, Christians and Muslims, and not only us, but also men and women of goodwill, to build together and to enter together as one human family into the ark of fraternity, which Pope Francis says is the only ark that will assure that we can navigate the stormy seas of today's world and will assure that there is a continuity, a survival of the human family according to God's project, which is exactly that, a humanity that thinks of itself as a community of brothers and sisters, which together take care of the common house that has been given to us, and a family in which no one, as Cardinal Tagle said this morning, no one feels orphaned.
Wow. Thank you so much, Diego. Dr. Al-Remiti, do you like to add something about these questions? Or,
Yes. First of all, as a matter of fact, I would like to ask, does the active conflict recently and the global problem has a religious dimension, and from where we shall start our initiatives? I think the leaders, religious leaders, could explain for their followers the purpose of the document, that there is a common ground for all human, and focus on what is gather us and try to resolve that problem within their communities. And the Human Document Fraternity giving great examples and propose a lot of projects and initiatives when it's come to the women, to the children, to the refugees. And I think that we have to adopt these initiatives and based on those examples, build our future projects.
Thank you so much. So we can move to the second question, focus on the issues of education, Catherine. In the last part of the declaration, we can read Al-Azhar and the Catholic Church ask that this document become the object of research and reflection in all schools, universities, and institutes of formation, thus helping to educate new generations to bring goodness and peace to others, and to be defenders everywhere of the rights of the oppressed and of the least of our brothers and sisters. So, in a society deeply influenced by media and the means of fast communication, what are the challenges and the obstacles to dialogue and to education to dialogue? So, Catherine.
Well, once again, there are many dimensions to this. In a situation, well, just take Nigeria right now, where you have the very complex religious dimensions, but which also have economic, social, historical, etc. dimensions. Education may not help very much in the sense of schools, but we do need to focus particularly on the hate speech and the issues around the social media, as we call it. And trying to address that problem is one that a lot of good minds are focusing on. Hopefully Facebook and Instagram and so forth are as well. But in a way, it's one of those problems where you really need to get to the roots and to understand where the hate speech is coming from. So I think that is a particular dimension that we're very worried about in a number of situations. But let's also come to the spirit of the recommendation, which is basically education systems. And 2 points there that I would make, apart from my earlier comment, which is the frustration that after so many years of talking about education, about religion, for religious literacy, and within religious institutions for development literacy or economic literacy, that you still have relatively few examples of effective programs. I mean, there are some, the Arigato Foundation, there are places that have exciting programs, but interreligious education, for example, in Bangladesh is non-existent. So you have a real need, I think, in many places to find good examples. But the two others, I can't resist mentioning that the best investment in the world by wonderful economists, etc., is education of girls. So a fact that, for example, we know from other crises that if girls drop out of school, they don't return without special efforts is a major area of focus right now. So that's the first. The second is I'm going to steal an idea from my colleague Tom Banshoff, who's been suggesting it for some time, that we actually take a part of these documents and turn it into a short module that could be used in many different places, that would be based on text, but also on the roots of the text, and that would be not a full curriculum, but even a day program, which could be in person, which could be online, and which would be a starting point for building a longer term and broader, I don't want to use a military metaphor, so it's not an assault, but an effort to address this basic problem of overcoming the resistance within education systems.
Well, thank you so much. And the problem of the education of women and family in general in some part of the world is still a very big problem.
And it's also a particular problem aggravated by COVID. So there is a need for particular attention to getting the girls back in school and making up for the huge losses that 1.6 billion children have been deprived of education. So we have an enormous challenge.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. Diego.
I would like to begin my answer by quoting Fratelli Tutti, a short definition of the culture of encounter, that it is the topic of this gathering yesterday and today. And I think so far has not been quoted. This short definition that the Pope Francis gives of what is a culture of encounter. He says, to speak of a culture of encounter means that we, as a people, should be passionate about meeting others, seeking points of contact, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. This becomes an aspiration and a style of life. So it's Fratelli Tutti 216. Why do I want to recall this definition? Because, okay, we are talking about the question about obstacles to dialogue and to education to dialogue. Well, I think we need to begin by making it clear that the whole idea of a culture of dialogue, a culture of encounter and of tolerance is based upon a fundamental premise, which is a positive affirmation of difference. And this is very well developed in Fratelli Tutti. And it was mentioned also yesterday. It was Professor Sandra Mazzolini. She spoke about the relational nature of human beings, so that we have been created in such a way that we find fulfillment in relation to others. And there is where the presence of difference, diversity within our societies becomes a possibility of fulfillment for ourselves and an enrichment. So the whole idea of dialogue and culture of encounter is predicated upon this positive view of difference. And from there, then it becomes clear where are the obstacles. So obstacles to, it becomes clear, at least to my mind, that what are the main obstacles to dialogue? Well, all those styles of life, ideologies, philosophies that reject the value of diversity and difference. And I would just, to be very brief, point perhaps 3 different levels, and that are all mentioned in Fratelli Tutti and also in the document on human fraternity. I would say at a very first level, there is this dissemination in today's world of an individualistic style of life, an individualistic culture, which gives priority to personal interest and weakens the communitarian dimension of life. And of course, from that perspective, the other, difference, common good, these are very secondary concepts. Yes, difference is neglected. It makes no sense from that way of life and understanding life. Then there is a second level, a second obstacle to dialogue, which will be, and I think also this is clearly denounced by Fratelli Tutti, some exaggerated manifestations of nationalism, of cultural and national superiority that are manifest in different parts in today's world. That, of course, here the other is excluded because it is perceived as a threat, in the sense that the presence of otherness, of difference in our society dilutes this sense of national and cultural identity. So from that perspective, the other is somebody to be kept aside, outside, or if it is already inside, to be assimilated. And third, and perhaps the most dangerous obstacle to dialogue today, in my opinion, would be, and this is very much mentioned and denounced in the document on human fraternity, when religions are manipulated by hateful ideologies, and this has also been mentioned by Catherine, hate speech. Is when hateful ideologies instrumentalize the religious sentiment of people for a project which has nothing to do with God and with God's project for humankind, that is a global community of brothers and sisters who love each other and take care of each other.
Oh, thank you so much. Diego, please, Dr. Sultan.
Actually, you mentioned two things, to work on media and education. I'm just suggesting that we can also add the other point, that we can enforce laws against hate speech. We have an example in UAE that we use educations and media to promote human fraternity, and we consider it as a soft power and awareness strategy for spreading the word of love and respect. On the other hand, there is solid power to stop the hate speech by enforcing such laws. I think this has a positive and negative side, but it's worth to discuss how the laws can play a very important role in this on this. I mean, yes, in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my last question for you all before opening the floor for the discussion with the audience. The declaration talks about the concept of full citizenship, and probably, I don't know, but from my point of view, we can read it as a critique to the society, to the modern society founded on human rights, but incapable to realize them. So, what is the essential ingredient of the full citizenship in the declaration, or to realize the declaration? What do you mean about, Catherine?
I think it comes back to the underlying spirit in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the concepts of basic equality of all people and dignity. But I think it also confronts the challenge of the left behind and the marginalized, and understanding better how to bring the attention constantly to the people who are suffering the most. And there is so much evidence that, in fact, the world has been on a track to address the problems of poverty in ways that have never been seen in human history. And I think that recognition of the potential, I mean, through most of human history, poverty was inevitable. Poverty was the lot of the large majority of populations. But we're now in an age where we have the real potential to end poverty for the first time in human history. And with that comes a responsibility. And it means both addressing the inequality issue, but also addressing the questions of the people who are at the margins, which is countries and places. And my hope is that we can see this time, this exceptional time, where the leadership of so many of the religious leaders is coming into a focus we've not seen before at COP26, that we really can understand this as a kairos moment, a moment of grace and opportunity when there really is a chance. And the Commission, the Vatican Commission, I think has this as an aspiration, as does the Declaration on Human Fraternity. But it means galvanizing and mobilizing a new kind of energy to revitalize the civic values, the Declaration of Human Rights, the concepts that lie behind it, the complex concepts of fraternity and sisterhood, etc., that we're talking about here. But this is a special moment, and if it will fizzle away if we don't work together to take advantage of that special time.
So, could I claim, Catherine, that from this point of view, human rights are not the outcome of a negotiation, but really part or essential part of a vision, prophetical vision?
I think to my mind, they reflect the best values of different cultures and communities. It's not always seen that way, but that's the way that I see that human rights and one of the sad things is that people say we would never be able to negotiate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights today because of the divisions and the tensions and the backlash against it. But it's the best we've got. And it is, I think, an expression of deeply held, shared, the best of our values.
Oh, thank you. Diego?
Regarding your question about the concept of full citizenship, I think in this issue, the document on human fraternity is very coherent. So as I said before, at least in my reading of the document, the essential affirmation, the essential theological truth that is acknowledged in the document, in this joint declaration, is that simple yet deep truth that we have been created equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and called by God, our Creator, to live as brothers and sisters. Well, if this is the fundamental theological truth jointly acknowledged by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam Ahmed al-Tayyib in this document, well, it naturally follows that the social political arrangement that best translates this theological truth is that of the concept of full citizenship, a social political arrangement that recognizes this fundamental God will equality of all of us. But you were asking in your question, what would be the essential ingredient of this concept of full citizenship? That made me think, and a little bit, and very fruitfully, I think. It was a very, very provocative question. I think that reading the document, and also Fratelli Tutti, it comes out clearly that the fundamental ingredient of a social arrangement that is truly based on the concept of full citizenship is religious freedom. Religious freedom, which is underlined in both documents. And let me explain very briefly what I mean. I take you back to Fratelli Tutti. You will remember that part of Fratelli Tutti where Pope Francis is speaking about death penalty. And he says that, look, we cannot forget that even the worst of criminals is still a human being, and that he or she has not lost his fundamental, inalienable human dignity. And he says, I quote, is Fratelli Tutti 269, if I do not deny the dignity to the worst of criminals, I will not deny it to anyone. And I think that we can apply this also kind of reasoning or this image to religious freedom. I think that if a society, any society, respects and does not deny this freedom, which is religious freedom, to any one of its citizens, then all other freedoms and rights will surely be respected. Why do I say that? Because it's a bit the most difficult right, and also for, now I'm talking as a believer, I think for believers, generally speaking, Christians and Muslims, it has been historically, probably, and we should not forget that, the most difficult fundamental freedom to accept and to recognize. Because we thought that we had to defend God's rights. God's right not to be worshipped in the right way, or to be talked about with the right formulas. And therefore, we have said that also, we Christians, not that long ago, we Catholics. Oh, only truth has rights. No? Error has no rights. And that led us to not acknowledge for centuries religious freedom. And I think, and I thank God that we have been able to evolve and to better understand some fundamental truth, and that denying this, at the core of the dignity of the human being is the fact that we have been created free. It's really what makes our worth and our dignity, our freedom, and that God is calling us, all of us, to enter into a relationship with God, to acknowledge God as our Creator, only in a relationship that has to be built on freedom, has to be freely sought and accepted. And then from that point of view, any attempt at denying the religious freedom, it's exactly the opposite of defending God's rights. It's rather an insult to the dignity of God and to the dignity of human beings, because God has created us free and calls us freely to enter into relationship with God. And from that point of view, I think that in my reading of the document, that would be today the essential ingredient of the concept of full citizenship as envisaged in the document on human fraternity. If we do not deny this religious freedom to anybody, then we will not deny any other right and any other freedom.
Thank you so much, Diego. Please, don't you want to? So we can, I have to thank you everyone for your participation, and now we can open the floor with the audience. If we have questions, please come to the podium to put your question. So please, Elena. Please introduce briefly yourself.
So thank you very much. It was really wonderful to hear these different perspectives. I'm Elena Dini from the John Paul II Center for Interreligious Dialogue. My question is related actually to the education, to interreligious dialogue that you mentioned during your talks. And I heard you, Dr. Marshall, for example, mentioning about education of female students in Bangladesh. At some point saying, we don't know, is there anything happening? And I have the experience of one of the alumni of our center who has been running for the past 3 years education. She's the provincial superior of a religious female organization, of congregation. And she has been running for 3 years education to interreligious dialogue to female students. So it goes into exactly the direction we're mentioning. These experiences, that's my feeling, having the chance of hearing concrete and local projects through our network of alumni, that these experiences do exist. So my question would be, how can we make these experiences real, concrete, local, tangible, reaching the political world, the economical world, reaching the think tanks and people who might not be aware of those efforts made by religious organizations in the field or NGOs. So how the religious and civil society might give their important contribution to the reflection we're making, since these experiences do exist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena.
A very sophisticated and important question. I think that we need, as so often with a problem like this, the problem is relatively limited appreciation in the global education world of the need for what some people call tolerance education or interreligious. It's really not on the main agendas. It has been, for example, in the Balkans. People have been very concerned about the issues in the Balkans and in other places. But I think you need, as we say, fire from above and fire from below. So the fire from below is the examples that you're seeing of communities that have tested all kinds of wonderful approaches to bringing people together, to introducing them to other worldviews at every level, from kindergarten all the way through graduate studies and seminary studies. So we need the examples, and there are a lot of very exciting examples, but you also need to make this a priority issue in government policy. And that does have various dimensions. Clearly, one dimension is looking at textbooks in ways that identify where prejudices are perpetuated and accentuated throughout the curriculum in your geography or history or mathematics, and as well as in whatever system there is to address the question of religious diversity, religious beliefs, etc. And it is this area of government policy that worries me the most, where my hope is that in this post-COVID period, and with the inspiration of documents like the Human Fraternity and Fratelli Tutti, that you will galvanize a new discussion about this dimension of education, which links to civic values, and which is invariably sensitive. There is no country where this is not a tough issue. But we need to take advantage of this moment, I think, to build from the bottom up, but also to address the questions at the policy level.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, okay. Chana.
Thank you for this lovely debate, Sultan, Catherine, Diego, and Deborah. And my question will be a little bit focusing on the last question that you have posed about the citizenship. The thing is here, following the footsteps, what Cardinal Tagle today just give us an interesting methodology and the dialogue and how to understand the document, especially Fratelli Tutti, seeing its roots in the Second Vatican Council. And here, especially in the Human Fraternity document and the Fratelli Tutti, we see this close relationship, a dialogue between the last two documents of the Vatican II, Nostra Aetate and Dignitatis Humanae, and Diego very well explained just all the religious freedom is rooted in the human dignity. But the part about the citizenship is not only, posing this, I will say, a dialogue and between two documents, two approaches, the need of interfaith dialogue and the special attention to religious freedom, and, inviting us to the idea of citizenship, but also rejecting the concept of minority. Even though the document, the Human Fraternity document, also makes a special reference to international documents. I mean, that's the UN 48 and European Convention of Human Rights and different documents of OSCE, but they have always a reference to religious minorities in a way. And how would you reflect on that? On the one hand, a reference to international documents, and the special, I will say, attention to citizenship, but rejecting the idea of minority. Thank you.
Thank you, Chana. Yes.
Thank you for this question. I would like to call the attention to the fact that the document on human fraternity does, at least the way I read it, does not reject the use or the concept as such of minority, but the discriminatory use of the concept. The discriminatory use of the concept. So when the concept, because minorities are also, there are sociological minorities, religious minorities, cultural minorities, I mean, it's a fact of reality. So it can have a descriptive value that is not a problematic as such, but it condemns the discriminatory use of the terminology, minority. And here, contrary to what many people in the Western, at least is my experience, when I have been discussing the document with, mainly here in a Western context, many people tend to think, that this idea of full citizenship no doubt came from the Christian side and we don't know really how went the writing together of this document. But many people, especially in the West, are convinced that this paragraph that defends the whole idea of full citizenship and rejects the discriminatory use of the concept of minority, no doubt this had to come from the Christian side. And yet, I will just send you back to a document, a declaration that was issued by Al-Azhar, so in Cairo, at the end of a conference entitled Freedom, Citizenship, Diversity and Integration that took place in Cairo on the 28th of February and 1st of March 2017. And the document, this declaration, you will find it in the website of the University Al-Azhar in different translations. And the moment you read it, you see where it comes, that is exactly the same idea that we find again in the document of human fraternity. So I am, even though I was not part of the putting together of this document, I'm convinced that this comes from a reflection that took place already 2 years before in Cairo among Muslim leaders.
Okay, thank you. We have time for the last question. I saw the hand of Michael Dreesen. Really? Okay. Short question, please, and short answer.
Short question. Difficult question. So I was very happy to hear talk about citizenship and attention to citizenship, which I think is represents a logical, coherent breakthrough of the development of dialogue in the Middle East. So, I mean, beautiful, and I'm writing on this. And I want to invoke Chatham House rules because I want to invite you to help me with something I'm struggling with when I talk about citizenship and its relationship to dialogue in the Middle East. And that is that in the Abu Dhabi Declaration, there is studious avoidance of the term democracy. It is not listed within the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Human Fraternity. And that has opened up the declaration to criticism that it is advocating for something full, comprehensive citizenship without advocating for a type of a political regime which makes that possible. Full citizenship requires participation of citizens within the decision-making of the political regime. So what do we do about that? Because I think it's a major breakthrough, and it's coherent with the development of dialogue through the Marrakesh Declaration or others. But what do we do with the question of the political regime? How do we talk about citizenship while not talking about democracy? The idea of Diego's, I think, was moving towards getting us to think about religious freedom as a place to do that. But just again, Chatham House rules, because I think this is something that's very that I want to promote. But how do we deal with this tension? And that tension, I think, is going to grow in coming years as more critics sort of mount up on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
I can start with two quick comments. The first one is that I've been part for 50 years of strategy discussions on development in, it must be 80 countries at one time or another. And never once has there been a discussion of religious freedom in those discussions in the sort of secular development world. So that's an interesting observation. I mean, obviously, you know, the Uyghur issue, for example, how do you deal with that? And explains it. But it is interesting that there has been discussion always of ethnic issues. I mean, dealing with Rwanda, Burundi, you really couldn't avoid that, or with other places. So I think that there isn't even a vocabulary for it in the operational sense. So I think that is important. The second issue, which we haven't touched on, and which to me is in a way, the crux of the democracy issue is the mushier concept of governance. And the issue of governance, if we don't get at the quality of governance, I think that's behind so many of the erosion of trust, the levels of anger, perception, misperception, is the poor quality of governance in so much of the world. And if we don't address that issue, and if as religious communities we don't really try to bring those issues to the fore, democracy, you know, elections versus whatever, I think we lose the plot.
Thank you, Catherine. Someone else would like to add something to this question? Okay, so we can close our panel, our session. Thank you again to my panelists, and thank you to the audience for your participation. We have a short break in the music hall, and we will be here in 10 minutes or less. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.